Leviticus chapter 24. We've covered a lot of territory. This morning, we're going to talk about holy oil, holy bread, holy name, and then finish off the book. This particular verse, the translators have chopped it up, so I've got to go through it very, very painfully to make a specific point. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Command the people of Israel to bring you pure oil from beaten olives for the lamp, that a light may be kept burning regularly." Now, King James uses the word continually, and there's a difference between regularly and continually. I brush my teeth regularly, twice a day. But you don't see me with a toothbrush in my mouth right now. That would be brushing your teeth continually. Well, the Hebrew word uses the word continually. Then we go down, and outside the veil of the testimony in the tent of meeting, Aaron shall arrange it from evening to morning before the Lord regularly. So you see the picture of the tabernacle, and there's the menorah, and the verse that we just read suggests that Aaron stays inside there, the high priest stays inside there, and makes sure that the candlestick doesn't move. He's going to arrange it from evening to morning. Well, that doesn't make any sense either. So you look at that word, and it really talks about making sure it's okay. In other words, the NIV hit it just right. The lamps may be burning continually, and Aaron is to tend the lamps throughout the night so they don't go out. Now, when you think of the Maccabees and Hanukkah and the candle burning 8 days, to make sure that it burns just one day, the high priest needs to be there. So it's really shocking that it would go for 8 days. But I want you to think of the implication as we transition from Leviticus into Joshua, into Judges, because what's going to happen as we transition into the history of Israel will be a cycle of sin, oppression, repentance, deliverance, and then just like a slinky, it goes down the steps, more sin, more oppression, goes downhill and downhill and downhill. And by the time you come to Samuel, I got ahead of myself. Let me talk about this as well. There'll be two fires that are not to go out. The first is that lamp, and the second one was chapter 6, where it talked about the fire of the altar. Now, what's interesting is it says for that particular one, not to quench out that fire. In other words, the high priest or the priest, the Aarons, have to keep the flame going inside the tabernacle on the menorah, but also keep the wood fire burning of the altar. Now, God has got this great sense of humor. Can you imagine the high priest is getting busy, he's got all the wood stacked up, the people are lined up to do their burnt offerings, and then the cloud starts to move. They can't put out that fire, can't quench the fire. They're packing up the rest of the tabernacle, taking down the tents and the posts and everything else, but they don't move until the altar moves. Sabbath mode. Well, here's the implication. By the time you come through Joshua and Judges and you hit 1 Kings, or First Samuel rather, you read about Samuel. And Samuel was this little boy. And look at this verse. In First Samuel 3, Samuel was dedicated to the Lord. He's living with Eli, and it says, the lamp of God had not yet gone out. That suggests that Eli let the lamp go out all the time. The lamp of God had not yet gone out, and Samuel was sleeping inside the tabernacle where the ark of God was. Why was this Ephraimite allowed inside the tabernacle? The only reason I can come up with was Eli's sons, Hophni and Phinehas, were so corrupt that Eli was trying to protect Samuel from what was going on. But there's a picture of how the holiness of God was started up, and then over time, things started to fall apart. Now we're going to talk about the bread. Ye shall take fine flour and bake 12 loaves on it. 2/10 of an ephah shall be on each loaf, and you shall set them in 2 piles, 2 stacks, 6 in a pile, on the table of pure gold before the Lord. And you shall put pure frankincense on each pile, that it may go with the bread as a memorial portion, as a food offering to the Lord. And every Sabbath day, Aaron shall arrange it before the Lord regularly. It is from the people of Israel as a covenant forever, and it shall be for Aaron and his sons, and they shall eat it in a holy place. The Mark 2 citation is when the Pharisees came and they attacked Jesus for eating bread on the Sabbath day. And Jesus turns around and he says, hey, David was eating the holy bread. And then the punchline of that particular episode was, man was not made for the Sabbath, but Sabbath was made for the man. And so you see inside this tabernacle some very special pieces of furniture. On the left, you see the menorah. On the right, you see the table with the showbread. And over towards the back end, which you can't see, is the table of incense. And that's where Zechariah was doing his offering when the angel appeared to him in the announcement of John the Baptist. Punishment for blasphemy. Whoever blasphemes the name of the Lord shall be put to death. Now, what's interesting is they didn't know what the name of the Lord was. They didn't know how to pronounce it. It was JVH, and we take that to be Jehovah, but there were no vowels. But at any rate, however you said it, if you blaspheme the name of the Lord, you'll be put to death. If you read anything written by a Jewish person even today, they will not write G-O-D. They will write G-D. And they look at that and they say that in conjunction with one of the 10 commandments, that thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. They're saying, well, so I don't take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. I'm just going to not take it at all. And so the penalty for blasphemy is death. And you see that reinforced in Matthew chapter 26. This is the Holy Week. This is Jesus in front of the high priest. And the high priest said to him, I adjure you by the living God, tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God. And when we were studying earlier in Leviticus, we learned that if you are adjured, if you're commanded by the living God to say something, You have to say, and we've translated that into our world, that the truth, the whole truth, and nothing back but the truth. You had to tell the truth. And so he says, I adjure you by the living God, tell us if you are the Messiah. Tell us if you are the Son of God. And Jesus said to him, you have said so, but I tell you from now on, you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming to the clouds of glory. And then the high priest tore his robes and said, he has uttered blasphemy. What further witness do we need? We now have heard his blasphemy. He deserves death. Leviticus chapter 24. Eye for an eye. You've heard that phrase many, many times, loosely translated. You could say tit for tat. The point of eye for eye, tooth for tooth is a punishment that's commensurate with the offense. No more and no less. Now, Jesus took a look at that and he said, but you have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for tooth. But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. And you see that phrase? That's where the Mennonites get the phrase non-resistance. Do not resist the one who is evil. But now we have to parse that when we look at James. James says, resist the devil. So what they're talking about here is not resisting an individual evil problem. Now, where that gets most interesting is in Romans chapter 13, which talks about civil government. And in civil government, we see, for he is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. They didn't have electric chairs back then. They didn't have gas chambers. And so when you look up here, what this is doing is it's reinforcing the validity of capital punishment. It's also telling us that when it comes to civil disobedience, you can't say things like, well, I'm not going to pay my taxes because a certain portion of the federal government is something that I'm opposed to. We have to obey the civil government. And then we'll parse that again with Peter, who said to the Sanhedrin, it's better to obey God rather than man. So chapter 25, the Sabbath year. We talked about the Sabbath a little bit. We're going to take the Sabbath week, tie it to the Sabbath year, and tie that to the year of Jubilee. The Lord spoke to Moses on Mount Sinai, saying, speak to the people of Israel and say to them, when you come into the land that I give you, the land shall keep a Sabbath to the Lord. No, it doesn't say the man. The land shall keep a Sabbath to the Lord. For 6 years you shall sow your field, and for 6 years you shall prune your vineyard and gather in its fruit. But in the 7th year, there shall be a Sabbath of solemn rest for the land, a Sabbath to the Lord. You shall not sow your field or prune your vineyard. You shall not reap what grows of itself in your harvest, or gather the grapes of your undressed vine. It shall be a year of solemn rest. The Sabbath of the Lord shall provide food for you, for yourself, and for your male and female servants, and for your hired worker, and the sojourner who lives with you, and for your cattle, and for the wild animals that are in your land. All its yield shall be food. So I'm honing in on certain words. You're not supposed to plant. You're not supposed to trim your orchards or your vineyards. You're not supposed to harvest. And if something happens to be producing by itself, let's say a vineyard, it's not going to take time off. It's going to give you an orchard. You're not supposed to even gather those things. You're supposed to live on what you gathered the year before. Very similar where they were at the time. The manna, 6 days. Seventh day, if you go out there, you're not you're in fact the manna wasn't even delivered. The 6th day, you're supposed to gather as much for the 7th day. But there's more. At the end of every 7 years, you must cancel debts. Which brings us to the year of Jubilee. We talked about 6 days. The 7th day was a Sabbath. We talked about 6 years. The 7th year was a Sabbath. Now we're going to talk about 7 windows of years, 49, and then the 50th year becomes the year of Jubilee. Now, when we were talking about the Levitical sacrifices, the Levitical festivals, we talked about the Passover, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Feast of First Fruits, the Feast of Pentecost, the Feast of Trumpets, and then the Day of Atonement. We talked about that first block being historical. We talked about the second block being prophetic. And the year of Jubilee has prophetic implications. When that trumpet blows, there's that window of tribulation, and then comes the millennial reign. And you'll see so much of the year of Jubilee in the millennial reign. You shall count 7 weeks of years, 7 times 7, so that the time of the 7 weeks of years shall give you 49 years. Then you shall sound the loud trumpet, the Feast of Trumpets, on the 10th day of the 7th month, and on the Day of Atonement, you shall sound the trumpet throughout all your land. What's going to happen on the Day of Atonement? What's going to happen when Jesus comes back? There'll be so many changes on this earth. There'll be changes to people. Now, it doesn't mean I'm going to grow a third eye or something. What the Bible tells us is that there'll be peace, and we'll study war no more. There'll be no more violence. And you shall consecrate the 50th year and proclaim liberty throughout the land to all its inhabitants. Where have you seen that red phrase before? Do, 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 do. It's on the Liberty Bell. Proclaim liberty throughout the land of all its inhabitants. That's why it's called the Liberty Bell. The 50th year shall be a jubilee for you. In it you shall neither sow nor reap what grows of itself, nor gather the grapes of the undressed vines, for it is a jubilee. It shall be holy to you, and you may eat the produce of the field. So you're not supposed to plant, you're not supposed to sow, you're not supposed to even gather things from your vineyard or your orchards. But if there's something out there that's wild, have at it. I will send you such a blessing in the 6th year that the land will yield enough for 3 years. They're talking about that last of the 7 sevens. And there's going to be that 6th year of planting, the 7th year of that 7-year window, and then the year of Jubilee. And what they're saying there is, I'm going to give you so much productivity in that 6th working year that you'll have enough food to eat for 3 years. Now, did this ever occur? Stand by. The reason I said that is if you did a word search on the word Jubilee in Scripture, it ends in the Torah. There is no indication that I've seen in the Bible that said that they ever exercised, they ever saw that 3-year miracle. So what did I do? I wrote to Ask the Rabbi in Chabad.org to see if in their writings outside Scripture, but they may have value nonetheless, to see if that has ever occurred. We don't know. But I do know this. During the millennial reign, we're going to see productivity like you've never seen before. So, what are some of the rules of the year of Jubilee? First of all, with regard to real estate, it's never sold in perpetuity. In other words, like a long-term lease. Priced based upon the time to Jubilee. In other words, if next year is Jubilee, I'm going to charge you so much for this piece of ground. But if we're just in the first of those 49 years, I'm allowed to charge you more. Because at the end of that window of time, the land goes back to the original owner. Now, if the land happens to be owned by a Levite, they're not allowed to sell theirs ever. Now, what are the implications of that? Here you see the passage of Ahab and his next door neighbor, Naboth, who owned the vineyard. Now, if you look at this thing in just its face value, you could sit there and say, well, Naboth, when he said, the Lord forbid that I should give you the inheritance of my fathers, Naboth, if he was just looking at what we were covering, he should have been allowed to sell that vineyard and then at the year of Jubilee, get it back. So did Naboth tell a lie when he said the Lord? So here's what's up. Ahab, even though he was of the bloodline of Jews, he married Jezebel, a Phoenician, and he started following the rules and regs of the Phoenicians. And in their particular case, if a king bought something, the king had it forever. So there's one issue. Then there's the second issue. In the 1990s, the archaeologists found the city of Jezreel, which was a walled city. And so you take a look at real estate inside the city walls. His vineyard was next door to the castle, so they were inside the city walls. I didn't have time to look at the layout of the archaeologists, but it's inside the city walls. And in that particular case, you can sell your real estate, but you have to buy it back within a year or it's gone forever. So Naboth may have had enough discretion to realize that king wants that real estate, but he's not going to sell it back to me ever. It's going to be gone. So, real estate rules, I sell it. I base the price tag based upon what productivity I expect out over the next X years between now and Jubilee, and then it comes back. If it's something within the walled cities, I sell it. I can buy it back within a year. Why would I sell something to buy it back within a year? Maybe I've got some kind of a financial commitment that has to be met. And if I can bounce back from that financial commitment, I can get the peace back. Blessings for obedience, Leviticus chapter 26. J. Vernon McGee calls these the iffy chapters because the word if appears 36 times in just those two chapters. And so the blessings for obedience. First, there'll be harvest time that continues until you're ready to harvest again. There'll be peace, and there'll be victory in war. I will turn to you and make you fruitful and multiply you, and I will confirm my covenant with you. Well, what was the covenant that he will confirm? The ultimate covenant was the coming of Jesus Christ, which we're about to celebrate this coming week. The covenant of the Passover lamb, the death, the burial, and the resurrection. You shall eat old store long kept, and you shall clear out the old to make way for the new. In other words, they had more than enough to eat. I will make my dwelling among you, and my soul shall not abhor you. When that millennial age comes, Jesus Christ is going to be physically seated at the capital city of Jerusalem. He says, I will make my dwelling among you. And I will walk among you, and I will be your God, and you shall be my people. I am the Lord you God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, that you should not be their slaves, and I have broken the bars of your yoke and made you walk erect. If the Son of Man shall set you free, you shall be free indeed. But another block of ifs. If you don't obey these rules, you'll have panic, disease, fever, heartache, famine, and foreign oppression that began with the Babylonian captivity, and it continued on. We're going to read in these chapters, it's not just the Babylonian captivity, but it's also the dispersion of the Jews, the northern tribes. They got intermarried with the Assyrians. The southern tribes, they went to Babylon. Some of them chose to go to Egypt instead. Read Jeremiah. The Greeks came, and they say that, the reason I say they say, it's not in scripture, this is Josephus. The high priest showed Alexander the Great how the Greeks were specified in the book of Daniel, and so they just let the Greeks come in without any battles. But then we talk about the dispersion of the Jews. They're everywhere. They've gone everywhere. And we're going to read not just that they're going to be dispersed, but we're also going to read that God will always provide a remnant. People have tried to stamp out the Jews since the beginning of time. It started with Pharaoh. It went into the book of Esther. It comes into Herod the Great. Then we come to modern times, and we have Hitler, and we have Stalin, and we have the Hamas even now. I will scatter you among the nations, and I will unsheath the sword against you, and your land shall be a desolation, and your cities shall be a waste. When Nebuchadnezzar breached that wall and he took them off to Jerusalem, that land was left alone for 70 years. Think of your own piece of real estate and what your house would look like if you did no maintenance for 70 years. Your driveway, if it's blacktop, it doesn't matter. There'll be things coming up through your driveway. The land was left a desolation. So it happened during the Babylonian captivity, and it happened again at 70 AD, and then 135 AD. At 70 AD, the temple was destroyed, and at 135 AD, the walls of the city were destroyed. Then the land shall enjoy its Sabbath as long as it's desolate, while you are in the enemy's land. Why was there a 70-year captivity? Because for 490 years, the Jewish people did not keep that Sabbath year. So God wanted each of those Sabbaths back. And so 70 years they were kept in captivity. As long as it lies desolate, it shall have rest, the rest that it did not have on your Sabbaths when you were dwelling in it. And as for those who are left, I will send faintness into their hearts in the lands of their enemies. You think of, say, Psalm 137, it talked about they couldn't sing their psalms. They hung their harps on the willows. They were brokenhearted. Jeremiah tried to tell them, it's going to be 70 years. Pray for that new nation. Settle down, have families, but keep faith in God. Now, there's this township that I used to live in. I've moved to Londonderry, but I used to live in a township called West Fallowfield. Why were fields left fallow? So that the land could rest. Even in modern times, we'll come up to ultra modern. In modern times, fields were left fallow so that the ground could rest, so that it could regain its fertility, so that all of the worms and things could do their thing. So now enter chemical warfare. We rotate crops, we spray our crops, but I don't know too many people that leave their crops fallow. And you know anybody that does fallow fields these days? In the West they do, yeah. And you shall perish among the nations, and the land of your enemies shall eat you up. If you stop there, then that would be the end of the Jewish nation. But if they confess their iniquity, if their uncircumcised heart is humbled and they make amends for their iniquity, then I will remember my covenant. Yet for all that, when they are in the land of their enemies, I will not spurn them, neither will I abhor them as to destroy them utterly. He was not going to destroy the Jewish people, even though they turned their backs on him. Leviticus chapter 27. We're doing all right. Holy vows. If you must make a vow, keep it. That's the moral of this whole chapter. If you must make a vow, keep it. And if the clock permits, I'm going to talk to you about 3 vows. The vow that Hannah made about her son Samuel, the vow Jephthah made about his daughter when he came back from battle, and the vow Saul made about anybody who ate anything while they were in battle, and Jonathan unknowingly ate some honey. If you must make a vow, keep it. I've got to go to Deuteronomy to compress this thing. When you make a vow to the Lord your God, you shall not delay to pay it, for it would be sin in you, and the Lord your God will surely require of you. However, if you refrain from vowing, it shall not be a sin in you. In other words, if you're going to make a vow, you better keep it. And if you don't make a vow, no big deal. You shall be careful to perform what goes out from your lips, just as you have voluntarily vowed to the Lord. So, holy vows. God does not require to make a vow, but it's better not to make one than to make one and break it. We read from Ecclesiastes, it is better that you should not vow than you should vow and not pay. And the impact on James is slow to speak. The vows that we're going to cover, I look at Hannah's vow, and that was the only one of the three I cited that was really kept. She said, I'm dedicating my son to the Lord. The other two, they were made in haste, slow to speak. Why does this thing say God wants 120%? When we studied the Levitical sacrifices, the sin offering and the trespass offering, there was a premium of 20% to give to deal with the transgressions. And we're going to see shortly a series of values given for individuals to get out from underneath that vow. And there you have the value of a person question mark, and you can read those different things. Those values were set up because that was the amount of hard labor you could expect out of any of those individuals. Examples of dedication. Hannah dedicating Samuel. We're going to come down to a punchline that I think is really interesting. And in due time, Hannah conceived and bore a son, and she called his name Samuel, which means asked of the Lord. And you know the story. She prayed for a son. In fact, Eli came and thought she was drunk because she was just, she said, no, I'm not drinking. I'm praying for a son. And then he prophesied that she would get one. I have asked for him from the Lord. And she said to Eli, oh, my Lord, as you live, my Lord, I am the woman who was standing there in your presence praying to the Lord. For this child I prayed, and the Lord has granted me my petition that I made to him. Therefore, I have lent him to the Lord. Now, when we talk about our kids, we talk about, they're really not our kids. They're given to us as stewards to take care of them, then we're supposed to give them back. But this sounds like it's the other way around. What Hannah is saying is this: I'm lending my child to the Lord for this life. You see right there, it says, as long as he lives. But one day, the child's coming back. That's a heaven time frame. So it's a sort of a different flip as to the kinds of things we're used to dealing with. Examples of dedication. Here's the second one: Jephthah and his daughter. If familiar with this particular passage, it's in Judges chapter 11. And I mentioned that cycle of sin, oppression, repentance, and deliverance. And we're going to see an interesting curve based on a translation of and versus or. We're going to see an interesting curve that some commentators put on this thing. But if I put it in the context of the book of Judges, everything is flowing downhill morally, I think he sacrificed his daughter. Okay, now, the difference between and or. If I said to you, every morning I drink coffee or tea, that suggests I get one or the other. But if I said to you, every morning I drink coffee and tea, that suggests I have some of each. So it's a totally different conclusion based upon how you translate, that word. Then whatever comes out from the doors of my house to meet me when I return in peace from the Ammonites shall be the Lord's, and I will offer it up for a burnt offering. Now, if you said or right there, there is room to say, if some kind of non-human comes out, I will sacrifice it to the Lord. But if a human comes out, I will, just like Hannah gave up Samuel, I will give up that human dedicated to the Lord. So totally different conclusion. So Jephthah crossed over to the Ammonites to fight against them, and the Lord gave them into his hand. Now, remember when we got into this topic of vows, we said, if you have to make one, keep it. Did he have to make one? He struck them from Eror to the neighborhood of Mirinth, 20 cities, and as far as Abel Karamim with a great blow. So the Ammonites were subdued before the people of Israel. We're going to finish the story, and then we're going to ask the question, did he have to make the vow in the first place? Then Jephthah came to his home at Mizpah, and behold, his daughter came out to meet him with tambourines and with dances. She was his only child. Besides her, he had neither son nor daughter. Note number one, we studied the burnt sacrifices, and it was not acceptable to offer up a human being. We studied Molech, and we said it was not only an abomination for the offerer, but also the people that were around the offerer. So keep those things in mind, but also keep in mind Judges is a downhill slope. Proverbs tells us this: it is a snare to say rashly, it is holy, and to reflect only after making vows. James tells us, be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. So, the vow of Jephthah, was it a necessary vow? First, the Bible tells us the Spirit of the Lord was upon him. Then the Spirit of the Lord was upon Jephthah, and he passed through Gilead and Manasseh and passed on to Mizpah of Gilead. And so the Spirit of the Lord was upon him. Secondly, his cause was just. One of the things we read when we're talking about the ifs and obedience was, if they were obedient, they would be given victory. So his cause was just. Jephthah to the king of the Ammonites, he says, what do you have against me that you have come to fight to me against my land? The king of the Ammonites says, because Israel, on coming up from Egypt, took away my land. Well, Jephthah's going to fix his history. Israel did not take away the land of Moab or the land of the Ammonites, but when they came up from Egypt, Israel went through the wilderness to the Red Sea and came to Kadesh. So, his cause was just, and the Spirit of the Lord was upon him. did he need to make a vow in the first place? The answer to that is no. So he wins the battle, and he struck them from Eror to the neighborhood of Mimnath, 20 cities. His daughter meets him. Now, this is also an interesting topic. This guy was a general. I'd like to think a general, just like when you picture George Washington at Valley Forge, the soldiers, they had little cabins. You go over visit Valley Forge headquarters. He had this fine house. So you could say that a general in this time didn't live in a common house. He had a better house. Would he expect some kind of animal to walk outside of his house? He's coming home and a goat comes walking out. Interesting question. But at any rate, his daughter came out. We've read all of those already. And he said to him, my father, you have opened your mouth to the Lord. Do to me according to what was gone out of your mouth. That's where the and or question comes in. If he said and, then she is saying, Dad, if you made a vow to the Lord, do it. Of course, we don't know if she knew what the vow was. If it was an or, then she's setting herself up for a life of dedication to God. So there's a difference there. So she said to her father, let this thing be done for me. Leave me alone for 2 months. So in other words, Jephthah comes home, the daughter runs out, he rips his clothes, she says to him, do whatever the vow was, and he tells her what the vow is, and she says, well, let me alone for 2 months that I may go up and down on the mountains and weep for my virginity, I and my companions. If it's an or word, you're sitting there saying, well, she's going to have herself one last party before she goes into a life of service. If it's an and word, she is saying, let me mourn for my virginity. Every woman that from Eve right on down was saying, would that I would be the mother of the Messiah. And she's not going to have that opportunity because she's either going to be given into service or she's going to die. So he said, go. And he sent her away for 2 months, and she departed, she and her companions, and wept for her virginity on the mountain. And at the end of the 2 months, she returned to her father, who did with her according to the vow he had made. In the context of the book of Judges, my conclusion, there's lots of room for discussion. My conclusion is that he offered her up. Saul's oath and Jonathan. And the men of Israel had been hard pressed that day. So Saul had laid an oath on the people, saying, cursed be the man who eats food until it is evening, and I am avenged on my enemies. I'm going to fast forward a little bit. I'm a beekeeper, so I study all kinds of things about bees. And what I've discovered is long distance runners, wrestlers, a long distance runner, many of them, is if you've watched the marathon, they've got these hospitality tables set up. The original marathon runner didn't have that, but they'd run by and they'd grab a cup of water and they'd keep going. Well, the Seasoned marathon runners will have a belt with holsters and things in it. They'll be chugging honey on the way along. A wrestler will chug honey for instant energy. So that's what Jonathan did. So we're going to get into the story. When the people entered the forest, behold, the honey was dropping, but no one put his hand to his mouth, for the people feared the oath. But Jonathan had not heard his father charge the people with the oath. So he put out the tip of the staff that was in his hand and dipped it in the honeycomb and put his hand to his mouth, and his eyes became bright. Instant energy. Then one of the people said, your father strictly charged the people with an oath, saying, cursed be the man who eats food this day. And the people were faint. Then Jonathan said, my father has troubled the land. See how my eyes have become bright because I tasted a little of this honey. How much better if the people had eaten freely that day. Saul was actually reducing the effectiveness of his army by putting out that oath. And Jonathan had enough sense to say that wasn't the right thing to do. For as the Lord lives who saves Israel, though it be in Jonathan my son, he shall surely die. Saul, the Bible uses the phrase stiff-necked so many times, stiff-necked and stubborn people. Well, Saul was the epitome of that. He was stiff-necked. He said, even though it's my own son, he's going to die. And I want you to look at verse 45. Then the people said to Saul, shall Saul die who has worked this great salvation in Israel? Far from it. As the Lord lives, there shall not one hair of his head fall to the ground, for he worked with God this day. So the people ransomed Jonathan so that he did not die. I want you in your mind's eye, go all the way back to the slide that had all of the different values for redeeming somebody. One of those was for a young man. And does ransom mean that they showed up with so many shekels and he was free? The Bible doesn't say. But what the people did do was to overcome the will of the king. This is the very last verse in the book of Leviticus. These are the commandments that the Lord commanded Moses for the people of Israel on Mount Sinai. We covered the sacrifices. We covered the garb of the priests. We covered various festivals. We covered ethics. And every time we came back and we asked the question, where is Jesus in all this? I'm convinced you can find Jesus in every book of the Bible. We also asked the question, where does the believer fall in all of this? But now this happened at 1500 BC. Turn the clock forward. And then came Jesus. Jesus said, I came not to destroy the law, but to fulfill it. The reason that he said that was the law is still in place today. The Bible tells us that the law is the schoolmaster of sin. The Bible tells us, Paul wrote to Timothy and he said, the law is not for a righteous man. Well, how can that be? The book of Galatians tells us that the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, and temperance. Against such, there is no law. If I'm walking in the Spirit, if I'm harvesting the fruit of the Spirit, then what Paul told Timothy was true. The law is not for a righteous man. These are the commandments that the Lord commanded Moses for the people of Israel on Mount Sinai.